Chapter 13. We hire a new guide. Hours later, my raft washed up at Camp Half-Blood. How I got there, I have no idea. At some point, the lake water just changed to salt water. The familiar shoreline of Long Island appeared up ahead, and a couple of friendly great white sharks surfaced and steered me towards the beach. When I landed, the camp seemed deserted. It was late afternoon, but the archery range was empty. The climbing wall poured lava and rumbled all by itself. Pavilion, nothing. Cabins, all vacant. Then I noticed smoke rising from the amphitheatre. Too early for a campfire, and I didn't think they were roasting marshmallows. I ran towards it. Before I even got there, I heard Chiron making an announcement. When I realised what he was saying, I stopped in my tracks. "Assume he is dead," Chiron said. "After so long a silence, it is unlikely our prayers will be answered. I have asked his best surviving friend to do the final honours." I crept up to the back of the amphitheatre. Nobody noticed me. They were all looking forward, watching as Annabeth took a long green silk burial cloth, embroidered with a trident, and set it on the flames. They were burning my shroud. Annabeth turned to face the audience. She looked terrible. Her eyes were puffy from crying, but she managed to say, "He was probably the bravest friend I've ever had. Then she saw me. Her face went blood red. He's right there." Heads turned, and people gasped. "Percy!" Beckendorf grinned. A bunch of other kids crowded around me and clapped me on the back. I heard a few curses from the Ares cabin, but Clarice just rolled her eyes like she couldn't believe I'd had the nerve to survive. Chiron cantered over, and everyone made way for him. "Well," he sighed with obvious relief, "I don't believe I've ever been happier to see a camper return. But you must tell me." "Where have you been?" Annabeth interrupted, shoving aside the other campers. I thought she was going to punch me, but instead she hugged me so fiercely she nearly cracked my ribs. The other campers fell silent. Annabeth seemed to realise she was making a scene and pushed me away. I thought you were dead, seaweed brain." "I'm sorry," I said. "I got lost." "Lost?" she yelled. 2 weeks, Percy. Where in the world—" "Annabeth," Chiron interrupted, "perhaps we should discuss this somewhere more private, shall we? The rest of you, back to your normal activities." Without waiting for us to protest, he picked up Annabeth and me as easily as if we were kittens, slung us both onto his back, and galloped off towards the big house. I didn't tell him the whole story. I just couldn't bring myself to talk about Calypso. I explained how I'd caused the explosion at Mount St. Helens and got blasted out of the volcano. I told them I'd been marooned on an island. Then Hephaestus had found me and told me I could leave. A magic raft had carried me back to camp. All that was true, but as I said it, my palms felt sweaty. "You've been gone 2 weeks," Annabeth's voice was steadier now, but she still looked pretty shaken up. "When I heard the explosion, I thought—" "I know," I said. "I'm sorry, but I figured out how to get through the labyrinth. I talked to Hephaestus." "He told you the answer?" "Well, he sort of told me that I already knew, and I understand now." I told him my idea. Annabeth's jaw dropped. "Percy, that's crazy." Chiron sat back in his wheelchair and stroked his beard. "There is a precedent, however. Theseus had the help of Ariadne. Harriet Tubman, daughter of Hermes, used many mortals on her underground railroad for just this reason." "But this is my quest," Annabeth said. "I need to lead it." Chiron looked uncomfortable. "My dear, it is your quest, but you need help. And this is supposed to help? Please, it's wrong, it's cowardly, it's—" "Hard to admit we need a mortal's help," I said, "but it's true." Annabeth glared at me. "You are the single most annoying person I've ever met," and she stormed out of the room. I stared at the doorway. I felt like hitting something. So much for being the bravest friend she's ever had. "She will calm down," Chiron promised. "She's jealous, my boy." "That's stupid. She's not— It's not like—" Chiron chuckled. "It hardly matters. Annabeth is very territorial about her friends, in case you haven't noticed. She was quite worried about you, and now that you're back, I think she suspects where you were marooned." I met his eyes, and I knew Chiron had guessed about Calypso. It was hard to hide anything from a guy who's been training heroes for 3,000 years. He's pretty much seen it all. "We won't dwell on your choices," Chiron said. "You came back. That is what matters." "Tell that to Annabeth." Chiron smiled. "In the morning I will have Argus take the 2 of you into Manhattan. You might stop by your mother's, Percy. She is understandably distraught." My heart skipped a beat. All that time on Calypso's island, I'd never even thought how my mum would be feeling. She'd think I was dead. She'd be devastated. What was wrong with me that I hadn't even considered her? "Chiron," I said, "what about Grover and Tyson? Do you think—" "I don't know, my boy." Chiron gazed into the empty fireplace. "Juniper is quite distressed. All her branches are turning yellow. The Council of Cloven Elders have revoked Grover's searcher's license in absentia. Assuming he comes back alive, they will force him into a shameful exile." He sighed. Grover and Tyson are very resourceful, however. We can still hope. I shouldn't have let them run off. Grover has his own destiny, and Tyson was brave to follow him. You would know if Grover was in mortal danger, don't you think? I suppose. The empathy link, but there is something else I should tell you, Percy, he said. Actually, 2 unpleasant things. Great. Chris Rodriguez, our guest. I remembered what I'd seen in the basement, Clarice trying to talk to him while he babbled about the labyrinth. Is he dead? Not yet, Chiron said grimly, but he's much worse. He's in the infirmary now, too weak to move. I had to order Clarice back to her regular schedule, because she was at his bedside constantly. He doesn't respond to anything. He won't take food or drink. None of my medicines help. He has simply lost the will to live. I shuddered. Despite all the run-ins I'd had with Clarice, I felt horrible for her. She tried so hard to help him, and now that I'd been in the labyrinth, I could understand why it had been so easy for the ghost of Minos to drive Chris mad. If I'd been wandering around down there alone without my friends for help, I'd never have made it out. I'm sorry to say, Chiron continued, the other news is less pleasant still. Quintus has disappeared. Disappeared? How? 3 nights ago he slipped into the labyrinth. Juniper watched him go. It appears you may have been right about him. He's a spy for Luke. I told Chiron about the Triple G ranch, how Quintus had brought his scorpions there, and Gairon had been supplying Kronos' army. It can't be a coincidence. Chiron sighed heavily. So many betrayals. I'd hoped Quintus would prove a friend. It seems my judgment was bad. What about Mrs. O'Leary? I asked. The hellhound is still in the arena. It won't let anyone approach. I did not have the heart to force it into a cage or destroy it. Quintus wouldn't just leave her. As I said, Percy, we seem to have been wrong about him. Now you should prepare yourself for the morning. You and Annabeth still have much to do. I left him in his wheelchair, staring sadly into the fireplace. I wondered how many times he'd sat here, waiting for heroes that never came back. Before dinner I stopped by the sword arena. Sure enough, Mrs. O'Leary was curled up in an enormous black furry mound in the middle of the stadium, chewing half-heartedly on the head of a warrior dummy. When she saw me, she barked and came bounding towards me. I thought I was dead meat. I just had time to say, "Whoa!" before she bowled me over and started licking my face. Now usually, being the son of Poseidon and all, I only get wet if I want to, but my powers apparently did not extend to dog saliva, because I got a pretty good bath. "Whoa, girl," I yelled. "Can't breathe, let me up." Eventually, I managed to get her off me. I scratched her ears and found her an extra gigantic dog biscuit. "Where's your master?" I asked her. "How could he just leave you, huh?" She whimpered like she wanted to know that too. I was ready to believe Quintus was an enemy, but still I couldn't understand why he'd leave Mrs. O'Leary behind. If there was one thing I was sure of, it was that he really cared for his mega dog. I was thinking about that and toweling the dog spit off my face when a girl's voice said, "You're lucky she didn't bite your head off." Clarice was standing at the other end of the arena with her sword and shield. "Came here to practice yesterday," she grumbled. "Dog tried to chew me up." "She's an intelligent dog," I said. "Funny." She walked towards us. Mrs. O'Leary growled, but I patted her on the head and calmed her down. "Stupid hellhound," Clarice said. "Not going to keep me from practicing." "I heard about Chris," I said. "I'm sorry." Clarice paced a circle around the arena. When she came to the nearest dummy, she attacked viciously, chopping its head off with a single blow and driving her sword through its guts. She pulled the sword out and kept walking. "Yeah, well, sometimes things go wrong." Her voice was shaky. "Heroes get hurt. They die, and the monsters just keep coming back." She picked up a javelin and threw it across the arena. It nailed a dummy straight between the eye holes of its helmet. She had called Chris a hero, like he had never gone over to the Titan's side. It reminded me of the way Annabeth sometimes talked about Luke. I decided not to bring that up. "Chris was brave," I said. "I hope he gets better." She glared at me as if I were her next target. Mrs. O'Leary growled. "Do me a favour," Clarice told me. "Yeah, sure." "If you find Daedalus, don't trust him. Don't ask him for help. Just kill him." "Clarice, because anybody who can make something like the Labyrinth, Percy, that person is evil. Plain evil." For a second she reminded me of Eurytion, the cowherd, her much older half-brother. She had the same hard look in her eyes, as if she'd been used for the past 2,000 years and was getting tired of it. She sheathed her sword. "Practice time is over. From now on, it's for real." That night I slept in my own bunk, and for the first time since Calypso's island, dreams found me. I was in a king's courtroom, a big white chamber with marble columns and a wooden throne. Sitting on it was a plump guy with curly red hair and a crown of laurels. At his side stood 3 girls who looked like his daughters. They all had his red hair and were dressed in blue robes. The doors creaked open, and a herald announced, "Minos, King of Crete." I tensed, but the man on the throne just smiled at his daughters. I can't wait to see the expression on his face. Minos, the royal creep himself, swept into the room. He was so tall and serious, he made the other king look silly. Minos's pointed beard had gone grey. He looked thinner than the last time I dreamed of him, and his sandals were spattered with mud, but the same cruel light shone in his eyes. He bowed stiffly to the man on the throne. "King Cocculus, I understand you have solved my little riddle." Cocculus smiled. "Hardly little, Minos, especially when you advertise across the world that you are willing to pay 1,000 gold talents to the one who can solve it. Is the offer genuine?" Minos clapped his hands. 2 buff guards walked in, struggling with a big wooden crate. They set it at Cocculus's feet and opened it. Stacks of gold bars glittered. It had to be worth like $1 gazillion. Cocculus whistled appreciatively. "Hoo-hoo, you must have bankrupted your kingdom for such a reward, my friend." "That is not your concern." Cocculus shrugged. "The riddle was quite simple, really. One of my retainers solved it." "Father," one of the girls warned. She looked like the oldest, a little taller than her sisters. Cocculus ignored her. He took a spiral seashell from the folds of his robe. A silver string had been threaded through it, so it hung like a huge bead on a necklace. Minos stepped forward and took the shell. "One of your retainers, you say? How did he thread the string without breaking the shell?" "He used an ant, if you can believe it, tied a silk string to the little creature and coaxed it through the shell by putting honey at the far end." "Ingenious man," Minos said. "Oh, indeed, my daughter's tutor. They are quite fond of him." Minos's eyes turned cold. "I would be careful of that." I wanted to warn Cocculus, "Don't trust this guy. Throw him in the dungeon with some man-eating lions or something." But the red-headed king just chuckled. "Not to worry, Minos. My daughters are wise beyond their years. Now, about my gold." "Yes," Minos said. "But you see, the gold is for the man who solved the riddle, and there can only be one such man. You are harbouring Daedalus." Cocculus shifted uncomfortably on his throne. "How is it that you know his name?" "He is a thief," Minos said. "He once worked in my court, Cocculus. He turned my own daughter against me. He helped a usurper make a fool of me in my own palace, and then he escaped justice. I've been pursuing him for 10 years. I knew nothing of this, but I have offered the man my protection. He has been a most useful—" "I offer you a choice," Minos said. "Turn over the fugitive to me, and this gold is yours, or risk making me your enemy. You do not want Crete as your enemy." Cocculus paled. I thought it was stupid for him to look so scared in the middle of his own throne room. He should have summoned his army or something. Minos only had 2 guards, but Cocculus just sat there, sweating on his throne. "Father," his oldest daughter said, "you can't." "Silence, Aelia." Cocculus twisted his beard. He looked again at the glittering gold. "This pains me, Minos. The gods do not love a man who breaks his oath of hospitality. The gods do not love those who harbour criminals, either." Cocculus nodded. "Very well, you shall have your man in chains." "Father," Aelia said again. Then she caught herself and changed her voice to a sweeter tone. At least let us feast with our guest first. After his long journey, he should be treated to a hot bath, new clothes and a decent meal. I would be honoured to draw the bath myself." She smiled prettily at Minos, and the old king grunted. "I suppose a bath would not be amiss." He looked at Cocculus. "I will see you at dinner, my lord, with the prisoner." "This way, your majesty," said Aelia. She and her sisters led Minos out of the chamber. I followed them into the bath chamber decorated with mosaic tiles. Steam filled the air. A running water faucet poured hot water into the tub. Aelia and her sisters filled it with rose petals and something that must have been ancient Greek Mr. Bubble, because soon the water was covered with multicoloured foam. The girls turned aside as Minos dropped his robes and slipped into the bath. "Ah," he smiled, "an excellent bath. Thank you, my dears. The journey had been a long one indeed." "You have been chasing your prey 10 years, my lord?" Aelia asked, battling her eyelashes. "You must be very determined." "I never forget a debt," Minos grinned. "Your father was wise to agree to my demands." "Oh, indeed, my lord," Aelia said. I thought she was laying on the flattery pretty thick, but the old guy was eating it up. Aelia's sisters tickled scented oil over the king's head. "You know, my lord," Aelia said, "Daedalus thought you would come. He thought the riddle might be a trap, but he couldn't resist solving it." Minos frowned. "Daedalus spoke to you about me?" "Yes, my lord." "He is a bad man, princess. My own daughter fell under his spell. Do not listen to him." "He is a genius," Aelia said, "and he believes a woman is just as smart as a man. He was the first ever to teach us if we had minds of our own. Perhaps your daughter felt the same way." Minos tried to sit up, but Aelia's sisters pushed him back into the water. Aelia came up behind him. She held 3 tiny orbs in her palm. At first I thought they were bath beads, but she threw them in the water and the beads sprouted bronze threads that began wrapping themselves around the king, tying him up at the ankles, binding his wrists to his sides, circling his neck. Even though I hated Minos, it was pretty horrible to watch. He thrashed and cried out, but the girls were much stronger. Soon he was helpless, lying in the bath with his chin just above the water. The bronze strands were still wrapping themselves around him like a cocoon, tightening across his body. "What do you want?" Minos demanded. "Why do you do this?" Aelia smiled. "Daedalus has been kind to us, your majesty, and I do not like your threatening our father." "You tell Daedalus," Minos growled. "You tell him I will hound him even after death. If there is any justice in the underworld, my soul will haunt him for eternity." "Brave words, your majesty," Aelia said. "I wish you luck finding your justice in the underworld." And with that, the bronze threads wrapped themselves around Minos' face, making him a bronze mummy. The door of the bathhouse opened. Daedalus stepped in carrying a traveller's bag. He trimmed his hair short. His beard was pure white. He looked frail and sad, but he reached down and touched the mummy's forehead. The threads unravelled and sank to the bottom of the tub. There was nothing inside them. It was as if King Minos had just dissolved. "A painless death," Daedalus mused. "More than he deserved. Thank you, my princesses." Aelia hugged him. "You cannot stay here, teacher. When our father finds out—" "Yes," Daedalus said. "I fear I have brought you trouble. Oh, do not worry for us. Father will be happy enough taking that old man's gold. And Crete is a very long way away. But he will blame you for Minos' death. You must flee to somewhere safe." "Somewhere safe," the old man repeated. "For years I have fled from kingdom to kingdom, looking for somewhere safe. I fear Minos told the truth. Death will not stop him from hounding me. There is no place under the sun that will harbour me once word of this crime gets out." "Then where will you go?" Aelia said. "A place I swore never to enter again," Daedalus said. "My prison may be my only sanctuary." "I do not understand," Aelia said. "It's best you do not." "But what of the underworld?" one of her sisters asked. "Terrible judgment will await you. Every man must die." "Perhaps," Daedalus said. Then he brought a scroll from his travelling bag. The same scroll I'd seen in my last dream, with his nephew's notes. Or perhaps not. He patted Aelia's shoulder, and then blessed her and her sisters. He looked down once more at the coppery threads glinting in the bottom of the bath. "Find me if you dare, king of ghosts." He turned towards the mosaic wall and touched a tile. A glowing mark appeared, a Greek symbol, and the wall slid aside. The princesses gasped. "You never told us of secret passages," Aelia said. "You have been busy." "The labyrinth has been busy," Daedalus corrected her. "Do not try to follow me, my dears, if you value your sanity." My dream shifted. I was underground in a stone chamber. Luke and another half-blood warrior were studying a map by flashlight. Luke cursed. It should have been the last turn. He crumpled up the map and tossed it aside. "Sir," his companion protested. "Maps are useless here," Luke said. "Don't worry, I'll find it." "Sir, is it true that the larger the group, the more likely you'll get lost?" "Yes, that's true. Why do you think we sent out solo explorers to begin with? But don't worry. As soon as we have the thread, we can lead the vanguard through." "But how will we get the thread?" Luke stood, flexing his fingers. "Oh, Quintus will come through. All we have to do is reach the arena, and it's at a juncture. Impossible to get anywhere without passing it. That's why we must have a truce with his master. Its master. We just have to stay alive until—" "Sir!" A new voice came from the corridor. Another guy in Greek armour ran forward, carrying a torch. "The Draconite found a half-blood." Luke scowled. "Alone? Wandering the maze?" "Yes, sir. You'd better come quick. They're in the next chamber. They've got him cornered." "Who is it?" "No one I've ever seen before, sir." Luke nodded. "A blessing from Kronos. We may be able to use this half-blood. Come." They ran down the corridor, and I woke with a start, staring into the dark. A lone half-blood, wandering in the maze. It was a long time before I got to sleep again. The next morning I made sure Mrs. O'Leary had enough dog biscuits. I asked Beckendorf to keep an eye on her, which he didn't seem too happy about, and then I hiked over Half-Blood Hill and met Annabeth and Argus on the road. Annabeth and I didn't talk much in the van. Argus never spoke, probably because he had eyes all over his body, including, so I'd heard, at the tip of his tongue, and he didn't like to show that off. Annabeth looked queasy, as if she'd slept even worse than me. "Bad dreams?" I asked at last. She shook her head. An Iris message from Eurytion. "Eurytion? Is something wrong with Nico?" He left the ranch last night, heading back into the maze. What? Didn't Eurytion try to stop him? Nico was gone before he woke up. Orpheus tracked his scent as far as the cattle grid. Eurytion said he'd been hearing Nico talk to himself the last few nights. Only now he thinks Nico was talking with the ghost again, Minos. He's in danger, I said. No kidding. Minos is one of the judges of the dead, but he's got a vicious streak a mile wide. I don't know what he wants with Nico, but that's not what I meant, I said. I had this dream last night. I told her about Luke, how he'd mentioned Quintus, and how his men had found a half-blood alone in the maze. Annabeth's jaw clenched. That's very, very bad. So what do we do? She raised an eyebrow. Well, it's a good thing you have a plan to guide us, huh? It was Saturday, and traffic was heavy going into the city. We arrived at my mum's apartment around noon. When she answered the door, she gave me a hug, only a little less overwhelming than having a hellhound jump on you. I told them you were all right, my mum said, but she sounded like the weight of the sky had just been lifted off her shoulders, and believe me, I know firsthand how that feels. She sat us down at the kitchen table and insisted on feeding us her special blue chocolate chip cookies while we filled her in on the quest. As usual, I tried to water down the frightening parts, which was pretty much everything, but somehow that just made it sound more dangerous. When I got to the part about Gayron and the stables, my mum pretended like she was going to strangle me. I can't get him to clean his room, but he'll clean 100 tons of horse manure out of some monster's stables. Annabeth laughed. It was the first time I'd heard her laugh in a long time. It was nice to hear. So, my mum said when I was done with the story, you wrecked Alcatraz Island, made Mount St. Helens explode, and displaced 500,000 people, but at least you're safe. That's my mum, always looking on the bright side. Yep, I agreed. That pretty much covers it. I wish Paul were here, she said, half to herself. He'd wanted to talk to you. Oh, right, the school. So much had happened since then that I'd almost forgotten about the high school orientation at Good. The fact I'd left the band hall in flames and my mum's boyfriend had last been seen jumping through a window like a fugitive. What did you tell him? I asked. My mum shook her head. What could I say? He knows something is different about you, Percy. He's a smart man. He believes that you're not a bad person. He doesn't know what's going on, but the school is pressuring him. After all, he got you admitted there. He needs to convince them the fire wasn't your fault. And since you ran away, that looks bad. Annabeth was studying me. She looked pretty sympathetic. I knew she'd been in similar situations. It's never easy for a half-blood in the mortal world. I'll talk to him, I promised. After we're done with the quest. I'll even tell him the truth if you want. My mum put her hand on my shoulder. You would do that? Well, yeah, I mean, he'll think we're crazy. He already thinks that. Then there's nothing to lose. Thank you, Percy. I'll tell him you'll be home. She frowned. When? When what happens now? Annabeth broke her cookie in half. Percy has this plan. Reluctantly, I told my mum. She nodded slowly. It sounds very dangerous, but it might work. You have the same abilities, don't you? I asked. You can see through the mist. My mum sighed. Not so much now. When I was younger, it was easier, but yes, I've always been able to see more than was good for me. It's one of the things that caught your father's attention when we first met. Just be careful. Promise me you'll be safe. We'll try, Miss Jackson, Annabeth said. Keeping your son safe is a big job, though. She folded her arms and glared out of the kitchen window. I picked at my napkin and tried not to say anything. My mum frowned. What's going on with you two? Have you been fighting? Neither of us said anything. I see, my mum said, and I wondered if she could see through more than just the mist. It sounded like she understood what was going on with Annabeth and me, but I sure as heck didn't. Well, remember, she said, Grover and Tyson are counting on you two. I know, Annabeth and I said at the same time, which embarrassed me even more. My mum smiled. Percy, you better use the phone in the hall. Good luck. I was relieved to get out of the kitchen, even though I was nervous about what I was about to do. I went to the phone and placed the call. The number had washed off my hand a long time ago, but that was okay. Without meaning to, I'd memorized it. We arranged a meeting in Times Square. We found Rachel Elizabeth Dare in front of the Marriott Marquis, and she was painted gold completely. I mean, her face, her hair, her clothes, everything. She looked like she'd been touched by King Midas. She was standing like a statue with 5 other kids, all painted metallic. Copper, bronze, silver. They were frozen in different poses, while tourists hustled past or stopped to stare. Some passers-by threw money at the tarp on the sidewalk. The sign at Rachel's feet said, Urban Art for Kids. Donations appreciated. Annabeth and I stood there for like 5 minutes staring at Rachel, but if she noticed us, she didn't let on. She didn't move or even blink as far as I could see. Being ADHD and all, I could not have done that. Standing still that long would have driven me crazy. It was weird to see Rachel in gold, too. She looked like a statue of somebody famous, an actress or something. only her eyes were normal green. Maybe if we push her over, Annabeth suggested. I thought that was a little mean, but Rachel didn't respond. After another few minutes, a kid in silver walked up from the hotel taxi stand where he'd been taking a break. He took a pose like he was lecturing the crowd, right next to Rachel. Rachel unfroze and stepped off the tarp. Hey, Percy, she grinned. Good timing. Let's get some coffee. We walked down to a place called the Java Moose on West 43rd. Rachel ordered an espresso extreme, the kind of stuff Grover would like. Annabeth and I got fruit smoothies, and we sat at a table right under the stuffed moose. Nobody even looked twice at Rachel in her golden outfit. So, she said, it's Annabelle, right? Annabeth, Annabeth corrected her. Do you always dress in gold? Not usually, Rachel said. We're raising money for our group. We do volunteer art projects for elementary kids, 'cause they're cutting art from the schools, you know. We do this once a month, take in about $500 on a good weekend. But I'm guessing you don't want to talk about that. You're a half-blood too? Shh, Annabeth said, looking around. Just announce it to the world, how about? Okay. Rachel stood up and said really loud, Hey, everybody! These two aren't human. They're half-Greek god. Nobody even looked over. Rachel shrugged and sat down. They don't seem to care. That's not funny, Annabeth said. This isn't a joke, mortal girl. Hold it, you two, I said. Just calm down. I'm calm, Rachel insisted. Every time I'm around you, some monster attacks us. What's to be nervous about? Look, I said. I'm sorry about the band room. I hope they didn't kick you out or anything. Nah, they asked me a lot of questions about you. I played dumb. Was it hard? Annabeth asked. Okay, stop, I intervened. Rachel, we've got a problem, and we need your help. Rachel narrowed her eyes at Annabeth. You need my help. Annabeth stirred her straw in her smoothie. Yeah, she said sullenly. Maybe. I told Rachel about the labyrinth and how we needed to find Daedalus. I told her what had happened the last few times we'd gone in. So you want me to guide you, she said, through a place I've never been? You can see through the mist, I said, just like Ariadne. I'm betting you can see the right path. The labyrinth won't be able to fool you as easily. And if you're wrong, then we'll get lost. Either way, it'll be dangerous. Very, very dangerous. I could die? Yeah. I thought you said monsters don't care about mortals. That sword of yours. Yeah, I said. Celestial bronze doesn't hurt mortals. Most monsters would ignore you, but Luke, he doesn't care. He'll use mortals, demigods, monsters, whatever, and he'll kill anyone who gets in his way. Nice guy, Rachel said. He's under the influence of a titan, Annabeth said defensively. He's been deceived. Rachel looked back and forth between us. Okay, she said. I'm in. I blinked. I hadn't figured it would be so easy. Are you sure? Hey, my summer was going to be boring. This is the best offer I've had yet, so what do I look for? We have to find an entrance to the labyrinth, Annabeth said. There's an entrance at Camp Half-Blood, but you can't go there. It's off limits to mortals. She said mortals like it was some sort of terrible condition, but Rachel just nodded. Okay, what does an entrance to the labyrinth look like? It could be anything, Annabeth said. A section of a wall, a boulder, a doorway, a sewer entrance, but it would have the mark of Daedalus on it, a Greek delta, glowing in blue. Like this? Rachel drew the symbol delta in water on our table. That's it, Annabeth said. You know Greek? No, Rachel said. She pulled a big blue plastic hairbrush from her pocket and started brushing the gold out of her hair. Let me get changed. You better come with me to the Marriott. Why? Annabeth asked. Because there's an entrance like that in the hotel basement where we store our costumes. It's got the mark of Daedalus. Chapter 14. My brother duels me to the death. The metal door was half hidden behind a laundry bin full of dirty hotel towels. I didn't see anything strange about it, but Rachel showed me where to look, and I recognised the faint blue symbol etched in the metal. It hasn't been used in a long time, Annabeth said. I tried to open it once, Rachel said, just out of curiosity, but it's rusted shut. No, Annabeth stepped forward. It just needs the touch of a half-blood. Sure enough, as soon as Annabeth put her hand on the mark, it glowed blue. The metal door unsealed and creaked open, revealing a dark staircase leading down. Wow! Rachel looked calm, but I couldn't tell if she was pretending or not. She'd changed into a ratty Museum of Modern Art t-shirt and her regular marker-coloured jeans. Her blue plastic hairbrush sticking out of her pocket. Her red hair was tied back, but she still had flecks of gold in it, and traces of the gold glitter on her face. So, after you? You're the guide, Annabeth said with mock politeness. Lead on. The stairs led down to a large brick tunnel. It was so dark I couldn't see further than a metre in front of us, but Annabeth and I had restocked on flashlights. As soon as we switched them on, Rachel yelped. A skeleton was grinning at us. It wasn't human. It was huge, for one thing, at least 2.5 meters tall. It had been strung up, chained by its wrists and ankles, so it made a kind of giant X over the tunnel. But what really sent a shiver down my back was the single black eye socket in the centre of its skull. A cyclops, Annabeth said. It's very old. It's not anybody we know. It wasn't Tyson, she meant, but she didn't make me feel much better. I still felt like it had been put here as a warning. Whatever could kill a grown cyclops, I didn't want to meet. Rachel swallowed. You have a friend who's a cyclops? Tyson, I said. My half-brother. Your half-brother? Hopefully we'll find him down here, I said. And Grover. He's a satyr. Oh. Her voice was small. Well then, we'd better keep moving. She stepped under the skeleton's left arm and kept walking. Annabeth and I exchanged looks. Annabeth shrugged. We followed Rachel deeper into the maze. After 15 metres we came to a crossroads. Ahead, the brick tunnel continued. To the right, the walls were made of ancient marble slabs. To the left, the tunnel was earth and tree roots. I pointed left. That looks like the tunnel Tyson and Grover took. Annabeth frowned. Yeah, but the architecture to the right, those old stones, that's more likely to lead on to an ancient part of the maze, towards Daedalus's workshop. We need to go straight, Rachel said. Annabeth and I both looked at her. That's the least likely choice, Annabeth said. You don't see it? Rachel asked. Look at the floor. I saw nothing except well-worn bricks and mud. There's a brightness there, Rachel insisted. Very faint, but forward is the correct way. To the left, further down the tunnel, those tree roots are moving like feelers. I don't like that. To the right, there's a trap about 7 metres down. Holes in the walls, maybe for spikes. I don't think we should risk it. I didn't see anything like what she was describing, but I nodded. OK, forward. You believe her? Annabeth asked. Yeah, I said. Don't you? Annabeth looked like she wanted to argue, but she waved at Rachel to lead on. Together we kept walking down the brick corridor. It twisted and turned, but there were no more side tunnels. We seemed to be angling down, heading deeper underground. No traps? I asked anxiously. Nothing. Rachel knitted her eyebrows. Should it be this easy? I don't know, I said. It never was before. So, Rachel, Annabeth said, where are you from exactly? She said it like, what planet are you from? But Rachel didn't look offended. Brooklyn, she said. Aren't your parents going to be worried if you're out late? Rachel exhaled. Not likely. I could be gone a week and they'd never notice. Why not? This time Annabeth didn't sound as sarcastic. Having trouble with parents was something she understood. Before Rachel could answer, there was a creaking noise in front of us, like huge doors opening. What was that? Annabeth asked. I don't know, Rachel said. Metal hinges. Oh, that's very helpful. I mean, what is it? Then I heard heavy footsteps shaking the corridor, coming towards us. Run, I asked. Run, Rachel agreed. We turned and fled the way we'd come, but we hadn't made it 6 metres before we ran straight into some old friends. 2 Draconai, snake women in Greek armour, levelled their javelins at our chests. Standing between them was Kelly, the Impusa cheerleader. Well, well, Kelly said. I uncapped Riptide, and Annabeth pulled her knife. But before my sword was even out of pen form, Kelly pounced on Rachel. Her hand turned into a claw, and she spun Rachel around, holding her tight with her talons at Rachel's neck. Taking your little mortal pet for a walk? Kelly asked. Oh, they're such fragile things, so easy to break. Behind us, the footsteps came closer. A huge form appeared out of the gloom, a 3-metre-tall Laestrygonian giant with red eyes and fangs. The giant licked his lips when he saw us. Can I eat them? No, Kelly said. Your master will want these. They will provide a great deal of entertainment. She smiled at me. Now march, half-bloods, or you all die here, starting with the mortal girl. It was pretty much my worst nightmare, and believe me, I've had plenty of nightmares. We were marched down the tunnel, flanked by Draconai, with Kelly and the giant at the back, just in case we tried to run for it. Nobody seemed to worry about us running forward. That was the direction they wanted us to go. Up ahead, I could see bronze doors. They were about 3.5 metres tall, emblazoned with a pair of crossed swords. From behind them came a muffled roar, like a crowd. Oh, yes, said the snake woman on my left. You'll be very popular with our host. I'd never got to look at a Draconai up close before, and I wasn't thrilled to have the opportunity. She would have had a beautiful face, except her tongue was forked and her eyes were yellow with black slits for pupils. She wore bronze armour that stopped at her waist. Below that, where her legs should have been, were 2 massive snake trunks, mottled bronze and green. She moved by a combination of slithering and walking, as if she were on living skis. Who's your host? I asked. She hissed, which might have been a laugh. Oh, you'll see. You'll get along famously. He's your brother, after all. My what? I immediately thought of Tyson, but that was impossible. What was she talking about? The giant pushed past us and opened the doors. He picked up Annabeth by her shirt and said, "You stay here." "Hey," she protested, but the guy was twice her size, and he'd already confiscated her knife and my sword. Kelly laughed. She still had her claws at Rachel's neck. "Go on, Percy. Entertain us. We'll wait here with your friends to make sure you behave." I looked at Rachel. "I'm sorry. I'll get you out of this." She nodded as much as she could with a demon at her throat. "That would be nice." The Draconide prodded me towards the doorway at javelin point, and I walked out onto the floor of an arena. I guess it wasn't the largest arena I'd ever been in, but it seemed pretty spacious considering the whole place was underground. The dirt floor was circular, just big enough that you could drive a car around the rim if you pulled it really tight. In the centre of the arena, a fight was going on between a giant and a centaur. The centaur looked panicked. He was galloping around his enemy, using sword and shield, while the giant swung a javelin the size of a telephone pole, and the crowd cheered. The first tier of seats was 4 metres above the arena floor. Plain stone benches wrapped all the way around, and every seat was full. There were giants, dracanae, demigods, telkeens, and stranger things, bat-winged demons, and creatures that seemed half human and half, you name it, bird, reptile, insect, mammal. But the creepiest things were the skulls. The arena was full of them. They ringed the edge of the railing. Metre-high piles of them decorated the steps between the benches. They grinned from pikes at the back of the stands and hung on chains from the ceiling like horrible chandeliers. Some of them looked very old, nothing but bleached white bone. Others looked a lot fresher. I'm not going to describe them. Believe me, you don't want me to. In the middle of all this, proudly displayed on the side of the spectators' wall, was something that made no sense to me. A green banner with the trident of Poseidon in the centre. What was that doing in a horrible place like this? Above the banner, sitting in a seat of honour, was an old enemy. "Luke," I said. I'm not sure he could hear me over the roar of the crowd, but he smiled coldly. He was wearing camouflage, combat trousers, a white t-shirt and a bronze breastplate, just like I'd seen in my dream. But he still wasn't wearing his sword, which I thought was strange. Next to him sat the largest giant I'd ever seen, much larger than the one on the floor fighting the centaur. The giant next to Luke must have been 5 metres tall, easy, and so wide he took up 3 seats. He wore only a loincloth, like a sumo wrestler. His skin was dark red and tattooed with blue wave designs. I figured he must be Luke's new bodyguard or something. There was a cry from the arena floor, and I jumped back as the centaur crashed to the ground beside me. He met my eyes pleadingly. "Help!" I reached for my sword, but it had been taken from me and hadn't reappeared in my pocket yet. The centaur struggled to get up as the giant approached, his javelin ready. A taloned hand gripped my shoulder. "If you value your friends' lives," my Draconide guard said, "you won't interfere. This isn't your fight. Wait your turn." The centaur couldn't get up. One of his legs was broken. The giant put his huge foot on the horseman's chest and raised the javelin. He looked up at Luke. The crowd cheered, "Death! Death!" Luke didn't do anything, but the tattooed sumo dude sitting next to him rose. He smiled down at the centaur who was whimpering. "Please, no!" Then the sumo dude held out his hand and gave the thumbs down sign. I closed my eyes as the gladiator giant thrust his javelin. When I looked again, the centaur was gone, disintegrated to ashes. All that was left was a single hoof, which the giant took up as a trophy and showed to the crowd. They roared their approval. A gate opened at the opposite end of the stadium, and the giant marched out in triumph. In the stands, the sumo dude raised his hands for silence. "Good entertainment," he bellowed, "but nothing I haven't seen before. What else do you have, Luke, son of Hermes?" Luke's jaw tightened. I could tell he didn't like being called son of Hermes. He hated his father, but he rose calmly to his feet. His eyes glittered. In fact, he seemed to be in a pretty good mood. "Lord Antaeus," Luke said, loud enough for the crowd to hear, "you have been an excellent host. We would be happy to amuse you, to repay the favour of passing through your territory." "A favour I have not yet granted," Antaeus growled. "I want entertainment." Luke bowed. "I believe I have something better than centaurs to fight in your arena now. I have a brother of yours." He pointed at me, Percy Jackson, son of Poseidon. The crowd began jeering at me and throwing stones, most of which I dodged, but one caught me on the cheek and made a good-sized cut. Antaeus' eyes lit up. "A son of Poseidon? Then he should fight well or die well." "If his death pleases you," Luke said, "will you let our armies cross your territory?" "Perhaps," Antaeus said. Luke didn't look too pleased about the perhaps. He glared down at me, as if warning me that I'd better die in a really spectacular way, or I'd be in big trouble. "Luke," Annabeth yelled, "stop this! Let us go!" Luke seemed to notice her for the first time. He looked stunned for a moment. Annabeth? Enough time for the females to fight afterwards, Antaeus interrupted. First, Percy Jackson. What weapons will you choose? The Draconite pushed me into the middle of the arena. I stared up at Antaeus. How can you be a son of Poseidon? Antaeus laughed, and the rest of the crowd laughed too. I am his favourite son, Antaeus boomed. Behold my temple to the Earth-Shaker, built from the skulls of all those I've killed in his name. Your skulls shall join them. I stared in horror at the skulls, hundreds of them, and the banner of Poseidon. How could this be a temple for my dad? My dad was a nice guy. He'd never asked me for a Father's Day card, much less somebody's skull. Percy, Annabeth yelled at me. His mother is Gaia. Guy? Her Lestrygonian captor clamped his hand over her mouth. His mother is Gaia, the Earth Goddess. Annabeth was trying to tell me that this was important, but I didn't know why. Maybe just because the guy had 2 godly parents. That would make him even harder to kill. You're crazy, Antaeus, I said. If you think this is a good tribute, you know nothing about Poseidon. The crowd screamed insults at me, but Antaeus raised his hand for silence. Weapons, he insisted, and then we will see how you die. Will you have axes, shields, nets, flamethrowers? Just my sword, I said. Laughter erupted from the monsters, but immediately Riptide appeared in my hands, and some of the voices in the crowd turned nervous. The bronze blade glowed with a faint light. Round 1, Antaeus announced. The gates opened and a Draconite slithered out. She had a trident in one hand and a weighted net in the other, classic gladiator style. I'd trained against those weapons at camp for years. She jabbed at me experimentally. I stepped away. She threw her net, hoping to tangle my sword hand, but I sidestepped easily, sliced her spear in half, and stabbed Riptide through a chink in her armour. With a painful wail, she vaporised into nothing, and the cheering of the crowd died. No, Antaeus bellowed. Too fast. You must wait for the kill. Only I give that order. I glanced over at Annabeth and Rachel. I had to find a way to get them free, maybe distract their guards. Nice job, Percy, Luke smiled. You've got better with the sword, I'll grant you that. Round 2, Antaeus yelled. And slower this time, more entertainment. Wait for my call before killing anybody, or else. The gates opened again, and this time a young warrior came out. He was a little older than me, about 16. He had glossy black hair, and his left eye was covered with an eye patch. He was thin and wiry, so his Greek armour hung on him loosely. He stabbed his sword into the ground, adjusted his shield straps, and pulled on his horsehair helmet. Who are you? I asked. Ethan Nakamura, he said. I have to kill you. Why are you doing this? Hey! A monster jeered from the stands. Stop talking and fight already. The others took up the call. I have to prove myself, Ethan told me. Only way to join up. And with that he charged. Our swords met in mid-air, and the crowd roared. It didn't seem right. I didn't want to fight to entertain a bunch of monsters, but Ethan Nakamura wasn't giving me much choice. He pressed forward. He was good. He'd never been at Camp Half-Blood, as far as I knew, but he'd been trained. He parried my strike and almost slammed me with his shield, but I jumped back. He slashed. I rolled to one side. We exchanged thrusts and parries, getting a feel for each other's fighting style. I tried to keep to Ethan's blind side, but it didn't help much. He'd apparently been fighting with only one eye for a long time because he was excellent at guarding his left. Blood! The monsters cried. My opponent glanced up at the stands. That was his weakness, I realised. He needed to impress them. I didn't. He yelled an angry battle cry and charged me, but I parried his blade and backed away, letting him come after me. Boo! Antaeus said. Stand and fight! Ethan pressed me, but I had no trouble defending, even without a shield. He was dressed for defence, heavy armour and shield, which made it very tiring to play offence. I was a softer target, but I was also lighter and faster. The crowd went nuts, yelling complaints and throwing rocks. We'd been fighting for almost 5 minutes, and there was no blood. Finally, Ethan made his mistake. He tried to jab at my stomach, and I locked his sword hilt in mine and twisted. His sword dropped into the dirt. Before he could recover, I slammed the butt of my sword into his helmet and pushed him down. His heavy armour helped me more than him. He fell on his back, dazed and tired. I put the tip of my sword on his chest. Get it over with, Ethan groaned. I looked up at Antaeus. His red face was stony with displeasure, but he held up his hand and put it thumbs down. Forget it. I sheathed my sword. Don't be a fool, Ethan groaned. They'll just kill us both. I offered him my hand. Reluctantly, he took it. I helped him up. No one dishonours the games, Antaeus bellowed. Your heads shall both be tributes to Poseidon. I looked at Ethan. When you see your chance, run. Then I turned back to Antaeus. Why don't you fight me yourself? If you've got Dad's favour, come down here and prove it. The monsters grumbled in the stands. Antaeus looked around and apparently realised he had no choice. He couldn't say no without looking like a coward. I am the greatest wrestler in the world, boy, he warned. I have been wrestling since the first Pancration. Pancration, I asked. He means fighting to the death, Ethan said. No rules, no holds barred. It used to be an Olympic sport. Thanks for the tip, I said. Don't mention it. Rachel was watching me with wide eyes. Annabeth shook her head emphatically. The Lestrygenian's hand still clamped over her mouth. I pointed my sword at Antaeus. Winner takes all. I win. We all go free. You win. We die. Swear upon the river Styx. Antaeus laughed. This shouldn't take long. I swear to your terms. He leapt off the railing into the arena. Good luck, Ethan told me. You'll need it. And then he backed up quickly. Antaeus cracked his knuckles. He grinned, and I saw that even his teeth were etched in wave patterns, which must have made brushing after meals a real pain. Weapons? He asked. I'll stick with my sword. You? He held up his huge hands and wiggled his fingers. I didn't need anything else. I don't need anything else, Master. Luke, you will referee this one. Luke smiled down at me. With pleasure. Antaeus lunged. I rolled under his legs and stabbed him in the back of his thigh. Ah! He yelled. But where blood should have come out, there was a spout of sand, like I'd busted the side of an hourglass. It spilled to the ground and the earth rose up to collect around his leg, almost like a cast. When it fell away, the wound was gone. He charged again. Fortunately, I'd had some experience fighting giants. I dodged sideways this time and stabbed him under the arm. Riptide's blade was buried to the hilt in his ribs. That was the good news. The bad news was that it wrenched out of my hand when the giant turned, and I was thrown across the arena, weaponless. Antaeus bellowed in pain. I waited for him to disintegrate. No monster had ever withstood a direct hit like that from my sword. The celestial bronze blade had to be destroying his essence. But Antaeus groped for the hilt, pulled out the sword and tossed it behind him. More sand poured from the wound, but again the earth rose up to cover him. Dirt coated his body all the way to his shoulders. As soon as the dirt spilled away, Antaeus was fine. Now you see why I never lose, demigod, Antaeus gloated. Come here and let me crush you. I'll make it quick. Antaeus stood between me and my sword. Desperately, I glanced to either side, and I caught Annabeth's eye. The earth, I thought. What had Annabeth been trying to tell me? Antaeus' mother was Gaia, the Earth Mother, the most ancient goddess of all. Antaeus' father might have been Poseidon, but Gaia was keeping him alive. I couldn't hurt him, as long as he was touching the ground. I tried to skirt around him, but Antaeus anticipated my move. He blocked my path, chuckling. He was just toying with me now. He had me cornered. I looked up at the chains hanging from the ceiling, dangling the skulls of his enemies on hooks. Suddenly, I had an idea. I feinted to the other side. Antaeus blocked me. The crowd jeered and screamed at Antaeus to finish me off, but he was having too much fun. Puny boy, he said, not a worthy son of the sea god. I felt my pen return to my pocket, but Antaeus wouldn't know about that. He would think Riptide was still in the dirt behind him. He would think my goal was to get my sword. It wasn't much of an advantage, but it was all I had. I charged straight ahead, crouching low so that he would think I was going to roll between his legs again. While he was stooping, ready to catch me like a grounder, I jumped for all I was worth, kicking off his forearm, scrambling up his shoulder like it was a ladder, placing my shoe on his head. He did the natural thing. He straightened up indignantly and yelled, "Hey!" I pushed off, using his force to catapult me towards the ceiling. I caught the top of a chain and the skulls and hooks jangled beneath me. I wrapped my legs around the chain, just like I used to do at the ropes course in gym class, and I drew Riptide and sawed off the chain next to me. "Come down here, coward!" Antaeus bellowed. He tried to grab me, but I was just out of reach. Hanging on for dear life, I yelled, "Come up and get me, or are you too slow and fat?" He howled and made another grab for me. He caught a chain and tried to pull himself up. While he was struggling, I lowered my sawn-off chain, hook first. It took me 2 tries, but finally I snagged Antaeus' loincloth. "Wah!" he yelled. Quickly, I slipped the free chain through the fastening link on my own chain, pulled it taut, and secured it the best I could. Antaeus tried to slip back to the ground, but his butt stayed suspended by his loincloth. He had to hold on to the other chains with both hands to avoid getting flipped upside down. I prayed the loincloth and the chain would hold up for a few more seconds. While Antaeus cursed and flailed, I scrambled around the chains, swinging and cutting like I was some kind of crazed monkey. I made loops with hooks and metal links. I don't know how I did it. My mum always said I have a gift for getting stuff tangled up. Plus, I was desperate to save my friends. Anyway, within a couple of minutes, the giant was suspended above the ground, hopelessly snarled in chains and hooks. I dropped to the floor, panting and sweaty. My hands were raw from climbing. "Get me down!" Antaeus demanded. "Free him!" Luke ordered. "He is our host." I uncapped Riptide. "I'll free him." And I stabbed the giant in the stomach. He bellowed, and sand poured out. But he was too far to touch the earth, and the dirt did not rise to help him. Antaeus just dissolved, pouring out, bit by bit, until there was nothing left but empty swinging chains, a really big loincloth on a hook, and a bunch of grinning skulls dancing above me like they finally had something to smile about. "Jackson!" Luke yelled. "I should have killed you long ago." "You tried," I reminded him. "Let us go, Luke. We had a sworn agreement with Antaeus. I'm the winner." He did just what I expected. He said, "Antaeus is dead. His oath dies with him. But since I'm feeling merciful today, I'll have you killed quickly." He pointed at Annabeth. "Spare the girl." His voice quavered just a little. "I would speak to her before our great triumph." Every monster in the audience drew a weapon or extended its claws. We were trapped, hopelessly outnumbered. Then I felt something in my pocket, a freezing sensation, growing colder and colder. The dog whistle. My fingers closed around it. For days I'd avoided using Quintus's gift. It had to be a trap, but now I had no choice. I took it out of my pocket and blew. It made no audible sound as it shattered into shards of ice, melting in my hand. Luke laughed. "What was that supposed to do?" From behind me came a surprised yelp. The Laestrygonian giant who'd been guarding Annabeth flew past me and smashed into the wall. "A roof!" Kelly, the Empusa, screamed as a 200-kilogram black mastiff picked her up like a chew toy and tossed her through the air straight into Luke's lap. Mrs. O'Leary snarled, and the two Draconai guards backed away. For a moment, the monsters in the audience were caught completely by surprise. "Let's go," I yelled at my friends. "Heal, Mrs. O'Leary." "The far exit," Rachel cried. "That's the right way." Ethan Nakamura took his cue. Together, we raced across the arena and out the far exit, Mrs. O'Leary right behind us. As we ran, I could hear the disorganized sounds of an entire army trying to jump out of the stands and follow us.